there is a silence deeper than mere absence of sound. It is the quiet felt when the will collapses into itself. The moment after striving has exhausted its claws, and the soul, stripped of pretense, rests against the cold wall of truth. You have felt it, in the strange hollowness that follows success. In the sleep you cannot enter, the room you cannot leave, the self you cannot escape. The world applauds ambition, adorns it with medals, but never speaks of its ultimate betrayal. For every desire fulfilled is merely another chain slipped over the throat. It promises meaning, but delivers repetition. You climb the mountain not to find peace, but to glimpse another peak higher, hungrier, lonelier. The moment you reach it, the will renews its thirst. It is not your friend. It is your tormentor, masquerading as momentum. Modernity, dressed in light, peddles shadow. It paints freedom in high definition, but binds the soul with invisible threads of comparison, dopamine, urgency. It teaches that you are what you do, what you post, what you buy. It whispers that peace lies just beyond the next upgrade, the next follower, the next lover. But each attainment leaves the same taste, the metallic dullness of temporary relief. Nothing holds, nothing satisfies. Not because you are broken, but because the game itself is a trick of the eye. You are not meant to win. You are meant to run, to chase the horizon until your legs fail and your spirit shatters. This is the architecture of the will to live. Not to enjoy, but to strive. Not to be, but to become. Always on the cusp, always incomplete. You were born into a system that cannot tell you who you are. It teaches performance, not presence. Identity, not essence. From childhood you are conditioned to confuse applause with love and effort with worth. And so you build a self, a collage of fragments, mirrored in others' eyes, hoping it will save you from the terrible silence underneath. But the silence never leaves. It only grows louder in still moments, when the world fades and the truth begins to speak. This truth is not cruel. It is simply unadorned. It does not console, it reveals. It tells you what you have always suspected, but fear to admit, that no amount of outer success can cure inner hunger. That all things pursued for their promise of wholeness eventually decay, lose color, rot in the light. The house you longed for becomes ordinary. The lover becomes familiar. The promotion becomes routine. The novelty dies, and with it, the illusion that anything out there can fill what is aching in here. Look closely, and you will see the pattern. Every form you chase carries within it the seed of disappointment. Beauty fades, money devalues, attention shifts, even wisdom, once attained, grows stale. There is no final arrival, no lasting summit, only the repetition of striving and the subtle erosion of hope. And yet you do not stop. You continue to move, even when exhausted, not out of choice, but compulsion. The will drives you, not with logic, but with longing. You suffer, not because you are weak, but because you are bound. Bound to a mechanism that mistakes motion for meaning. Bound to a will that feeds on illusion. This is not a flaw, it is the essence of being. To exist is to hunger, to want without end. The animal, the lover, the thinker, all ache, all grasp, all thirst. The saints withdraw not from disdain, but from understanding. They have tasted the endlessness of striving and chosen stillness, not as escape, but as surrender. But you have been told to fight, to improve, to conquer, as if the human soul were a machine awaiting optimization, as if burnout were a badge of honor, as if exhaustion meant you were doing something right. And so you obey, you push, you perform, you achieve. And when the applause comes, it sounds like silence. Because the part of you that claps, the part that wants, is already seeking the next thing. This is the trap. Not that you want too much, but that wanting itself is the wound. The will is a blind god. It does not care for peace. It does not seek fulfillment. It only knows movement. It devours moments, transforms satisfaction into restlessness, pleasure into craving. You are not its master. You are its servant until you see. And now, in this moment, you are beginning to see. You have touched enough illusions to feel the outline of the real. You have run far enough to sense that there is no finish line. You have suffered enough to know that pain is not punishment, but prophecy. It is not the end, it is the beginning of truth. When the ego breaks, the soul begins to breathe. When the dream dissolves, vision becomes possible. Not the vision of ambition, but of clarity. The kind that comes not from doing, but from ceasing. From laying down the weapons. From letting the moment speak. And what it says is this: there is nothing wrong with you. Nothing to fix. Nothing to become. The pain you carry is not proof of failure. It is the evidence of awareness. You are waking up. And awakening is not euphoric. It is brutal. It is the shattering of false gods. The collapse of sacred scripts. The dying of desire. You do not feel stuck because you are lost. You feel stuck because you are beginning to stop running. The momentum is fading. The will is weakening. The old compulsions no longer satisfy. And in that stillness, the terror arises not of death, but of truth. The truth that there is no next that will save you. No outcome that will finally make you whole. This is not a crisis. It is a doorway. But to pass through, you must die. Not physically, but symbolically. The self you built, the story you clung to, the hope you worshipped, all must go. The identity that climbed, that conquered, that achieved, must be laid down. You must become no one, empty, silent, still. And in that stillness, something stirs. Not a new desire, but a new dimension. Not ambition, but awareness. A quiet seeing, beyond names. A presence that does not grasp, because it knows there is nothing to hold. You were never meant to become. You were meant to be. Yet, even being, once spoken, becomes concept. So words fail, and all that remains is this breath, this moment, this sound of silence between thoughts. Do you hear it? It is not calling you forward. It is calling you home. Suffering is not the interruption of life. It is its very ground. Joy is not the rule, but the exception. And even joy, when inspected, trembles beneath the weight of its impermanence. Every laugh echoes with the knowledge that it must end. Every embrace carries the premonition of parting. Nothing lasts, and that is the cruel logic of existence. All we touch dissolves. All we love slips from our grasp. The hourglass spills not just sand, but meaning. We pretend, of course. We fill our days with the theater of purpose, the rituals of busyness, the narcotic hum of distraction. We call it a career, a relationship, a future. But beneath it all lies the same silent ache, that no structure we build can hold back the flood, that no identity we wear can keep us dry. The rain falls through the roof of our effort, and the floorboards of our certainty rot quietly beneath us. Love promises escape, but delivers attachment. And attachment breeds fear, not because love is false, but because it insists on permanence in a world ruled by decay. To love is to say, do not change, do not leave, do not die. But everything changes, everyone leaves, everything dies. And so love becomes grief in slow motion. We hold tightly, not because we are full, but because we are afraid of the emptiness waiting at the door. Pain is the only teacher that does not lie. It strips away the decoration and leads us into the wilderness of what is real. It asks no questions, but it answers them all. In pain, we are honest. In pain, we are naked. The masks fall, the poses dissolve, and we are left only with ourselves. And the frightening realization that we do not know who that self-island we never did. We only performed it for the world, hoping someone would clap loud enough to drown out the silence inside. The illusion is not outside, it is in our very perception. We see things not as they are, but as we want them to be. We dress emptiness in meaning. We crown boredom with goals. We force order upon the chaos, not because it is real, but because we cannot bear its absence. The mind is a painter who cannot stop painting, even when the canvas is soaked in tears. It creates meaning because the alternative nothingness is too unbearable to face. But the truth waits beneath the brushstrokes. It waits in the cracks, the silences, the pauses between desires. It does not shout, it does not seduce, it simply is. And once glimpsed, it cannot be forgotten. The world dims. The old games lose their taste. The glittering prizes seem like plastic. And you, once hungry, now stand motionless at the buffet of existence, unable to swallow what once thrilled you. This is not depression. It is awakening. To see through the veil is to feel grief, not because something is lost, but because everything was always illusion. The child who believed the world was kind The lover who believed in forever, the seeker who believed in destination, all must mourn, not for what has ended, but for what was never truly there. Mourning is the soul's way of washing itself clean of falsehood. And after mourning comes silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of recognition. The mind grows quiet, not from satisfaction, but from exhaustion. The will loosens its grip. The pulse of craving slows. And in its place, a strange stillness. Neither joy nor despair, but something deeper. Detachment. Not numbness, but clarity without clinging. Vision without wanting. You begin to notice things. The way a leaf trembles before falling. The sound of your own breath in an empty room. The quiet ache behind another smile. You see not just what people say, but the suffering they are trying to hide. You do not judge them. You understand. Because you, too, have tried to hide. The world becomes transparent. Not because it is lighter, but because your grasp has loosened. You see through ambition and pity the ones still climbing. You see through romance and bless the ones still hoping. You see through success and no longer envy the ones who shine. They are all beautiful and they are all asleep. You cannot wake them. You can only walk among them quietly, without hunger, without pretense, without the need to be seen. You become the witness, not of events, but of the machinery behind them. You see how every act is rooted in fear or desire. How every word is a cry for meaning or a mask for emptiness. How every life is a loop, dressed in different costumes but dancing the same tragic ballet. Detachment is not coldness, it is warmth without expectation, love without ownership, presence without projection. It is the rarest freedom, not the ability to do what you want, but the absence of needing to do anything at all. You sit with the moment not because it is beautiful, but because it is all there is, and it is enough. Because in the absence of striving, something ancient returns, a nameless peace, a quiet joy, not dependent on outcome. It arises not from possession, but from relinquishment. It lives not in the mind, but in the still center where thought cannot reach. It does not argue, it simply waits, like a stone in a riverbed, like a candle flickering in an abandoned chapel. You are not healed, you are not fixed, you are simply no longer pretending. The veil is down, the play is over, and what remains is not a happy ending, but the end of needing one. You no longer seek to be saved, you no longer seek to be understood, you no longer seek to be more than this breath. And this, strangely, is freedom. Not the freedom promised by the world, but the only real kind, freedom from the world, from its voices, its urgencies, its impossible promises. You walk among the ruins of meaning and find them beautiful, not because they shine, but because they no longer bind you. You are not empty, you are free. There is no enemy greater than hope, for hope is the most elegant disguise of delusion, an opiate dressed in sunlight, whispering that tomorrow will be different, kinder, more bearable. It never speaks of its failures. It only seduces, promising that the hunger in the soul is merely a waiting room, not a condition of existence. But the wise do not hope. They observe, they endure, and in their stillness they discover the final betrayal, that hope is not a flame, but a leash. Every system that surrounds you is built on this promise of elsewhere. The marketplace of human affairs thrives on your discontent. Religion peddles eternity to keep you compliant. Politics sells the illusion of change to conceal the machinery of repetition. Even philosophy, in its cheaper forms, constructs conceptual labyrinths to distract from the abyss. All of it, a theater of soothing lies meant to keep you from standing still long enough to see that there is nowhere to go. The truth is not hidden. It is simply unbearable, that all things pass and none return, that every joy carries within it the embryo of sorrow. That memory is not a treasure, but a wound that refuses to close. The child laughs, not knowing that time is devouring him. The lover touches, not knowing that love is already turning to ash. We live not with the innocence of bliss, but with the blindness of momentum. We go on because we are already going. And yet there are moments, brief, terrible moments, when the veil trembles. A loss, a silence, a glance into a mirror that no longer flatters. These moments do not destroy us, they reveal us. They show what was always true but never admitted, that life is not a journey but a decline, not an ascent toward fulfillment, but a gradual release into dissolution. What you call burnout is not the body failing, it is the will recoiling. It is the quiet scream of a soul that no longer believes in its own performance. You feel stuck not because you are weak, but because you have glimpsed the futility of effort. You have seen that even when you win, you lose, that every summit is followed by a fall, every applause by silence, every intimacy by distance. And so you stand still, not from laziness, but from clarity. You are told to find your purpose, but purpose is merely a shape given to chaos, a word we assign to randomness, to ease the burden of being born without consent. What purpose did the tree choose? What purpose does the wave seek? Only man, plagued by consciousness, invents meaning as a defense against the terror of time. But meaning is not found, it is fabricated. And the moment it no longer serves, it disintegrates like paper in fire. The wise do not seek meaning, they seek truth. And truth does not comfort, it dissolves. It strips away the ornaments of identity and ambition, and leaves you naked before the infinite. Most turn away, they clothe themselves again in stories. But a few, those rare few, remain exposed. They suffer not more, but more honestly. They cry without shame, they walk without illusion, they love without clutching. And in their gaze, there is no promise, only presence. They have no need to speak. Their silence is enough. It says what words cannot. That peace is not found through answers, but through the death of questions. That salvation is not a destination, but the absence of need to arrive. They do not teach. They reflect. They hold up the mirror you have avoided all your life. And in its surface you see not a hero, but a ghost. Not a future, but a repetition. Not a path, but a prison. And then you are free. Not because the prison has vanished, but because you see that the door was never locked. That the walls were built of language, of belief, of inherited hunger. That you were always allowed to sit down, to stop, to fall silent. But you did not, because stopping feels like dying. Because silence feels like erasure. Because to let go feels like losing what little you thought you had. But nothing was ever yours. Not the body, not the name, not the achievements, not even the thoughts that passed through your mind like birds in migration. All borrowed, all temporary, all destined to return to dust. You cling only because you forget that what clings is also fading. Detachment is not indifference. It is intimacy without control. It is love without grasping. It is presence without story. The detached do not withdraw from life. They enter it fully, because they no longer seek to own it. They see the world not as something to be improved, but as something to be understood, and in understanding, mourned. This mourning is not a phase, it is a way of seeing, a soft gaze that falls upon all things with tenderness, knowing they will vanish. The flower, the gesture, the glance, all ephemeral, all sacred precisely because they pass. The detached weep not because they want more, but because they know they cannot keep anything. And yet this weeping is not despair. It is the only honest joy. A joy that does not depend on outcomes. That arises like dew, quietly, without cause. A joy that watches the world burn and still finds beauty in the ashes. Not hope, not escape, but the faint warmth of a candle in the night, enough to see, but not enough to lead. You are beginning to feel it now, that flicker. That quiet warmth in the center of your chest that asks for nothing. It does not demand progress. It does not crave success. It does not negotiate with pain. It simply is. And in its light, everything begins to soften the need, the struggle, the self. You do not dissolve into the universe. You remember, you were never separate from it. There is no end to this remembering, no final insight, no victory over suffering. Only the slow, patient erosion of illusion. The gentle wearing down of the self until what remains is not enlightenment, but honesty, not transcendence, but surrender. And in that surrender, a peace that does not shine. It simply endures. There are no final awakenings, only deeper levels of disillusionment. Each veil lifted reveals another, more subtle, more intimate, more painful. What you thought was the core was only casing. What you clung to as the final truth was only a quieter lie. Even awareness becomes a costume once named. Even detachment can turn into pride. And so the descent must continue, not into enlightenment, but into emptiness. The self, so carefully sculpted through memory and performance, does not die all at once. It fades, like a face in the fog, resisting dissolution with every echo of thought. It wants to believe it matters, that it is chosen, that its story carries weight. But when the mirror shatters, when time loses its promise, all that remains is a ghost staring back at itself, still mouthing its lines, though the stage has burned away. There is no villain, no grand betrayal, only the silent machinery of nature, turning, indifferent. The stars do not blink for your sorrow, the wind does not pause for your confusion. The earth does not care if you understand. And this is not cruelty, it is freedom. The world owes you nothing. And in that nothing, you are no longer bound. You are not special. You are not cursed. You are simply here for a moment, like smoke curling in a cold sky. This truth lands with weight, heavier than grief, quieter than fear. It strips you of every justification, every excuse, and then it sits with you, without agenda, without teaching. It does not want you to grow. It does not want you to change. It only wants you to see. And what you see is this: that the deepest suffering comes not from what is, but from the refusal to accept it. We are creatures of resistance. We rebel against time, against death, against the erosion of everything we love. We call this courage, but it is agony in noble clothes. It prolongs the ache. It glorifies the wound. To resist life's impermanence is to scratch endlessly at a door that will never open. To surrender is not to give up. It is to stop asking the door to become something it is not. Even memory betrays. What once burned brightly fades into caricature, then into shadow, then into absence. The faces blur, the voices thin. And yet we hoard these fragments as if they might reconstruct the warmth of what has already gone cold. We scroll through moments, hoping to re-feel what can never return. But memory is not a sanctuary. It is a mausoleum, and time, that silent executioner, drags us forward, not into better, but into different. Not into clarity, but into complexity. Youth promised answers, age delivers silence. And within that silence grows the only thing that endures: stillness. Not the stillness of calm, but of acceptance. Not the stillness of peace, but of emptiness, fully allowed. You begin to see the lives of others, not as dramas, but as repetitions of the same hunger. They chase, they fear, they decorate their prisons with meaning. You no longer envy, you no longer pity, you simply see, and this seeing is not superiority, it is sorrow made clear. You do not look down, you look through the masks, the movements, the striving. Everything is motion pretending to be form. Even your own thoughts lose their grip. They come, but they do not bind. They speak, but they do not convince. You watch them pass like strangers in fog, familiar but irrelevant. You no longer build identity from opinion, no longer gather meaning from narrative. You are becoming transparent to yourself. A presence, not a personality. A gaze, not a name. And here, in this disrobing of self, suffering transforms. It does not vanish, but it becomes sacred. It is no longer a problem to solve. It is a path, a companion, a presence that softens the edges of arrogance and makes the soul tender. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start whispering, "Of course." You carry your pain not like a wound, but like a lantern. It does not lead forward, it only reveals what is near. Relationships change, not because others change, but because you no longer demand. You no longer ask people to be your source. You no longer manipulate affection to keep loneliness at bay. You sit with the loneliness. You make space for its sharp contours. And in that space, love becomes something quieter. Not a transaction, but a witnessing. Not a rescue, but a recognition. You love without needing. You give without agenda. And when they leave, as they always do, you let them. Not from apathy, but from understanding. Everything leaves. That is the contract. Every hello is a funeral in disguise. Every birth, a clock starting to count down. This is not tragedy, it is design. What vanishes reveals the eternal by its contrast. And what is eternal? Not the soul, not consciousness, not some secret refuge beyond the veil. The eternal is simply this moment, ungrasped, the breath taken without effort, the tear that falls without resistance, the silence that follows every truth, the space between words, the ache that does not end and no longer needs to. You do not transcend this world. You dissolve into it. And as the boundaries erode, you feel it, the soft merging of sorrow and serenity. Not opposites, not enemies, but twins born from the same womb of awareness. Sorrow opens the chest. Serenity enters through the wound. Together, they form the only wisdom that does not lie. To see all things clearly and still remain. There is no more story to tell. Only this breath and this silence. And now the path narrows. Not toward a peak, but toward vanishing. The questions fall away, not because they are answered, but because they no longer bind. The seeking fades. The hunger withers. The self exhales. There is no revelation. No final word. Only a gentle receding into what was always here, like a tide pulling back into the dark body of the sea. You no longer speak of becoming. You no longer dream of arrival. The myth of progress collapses into the still rhythm of being. You walk not toward a goal, but within the breath. Each step no longer a means, but an end unto itself. Each glance not an investigation, but a resting place. Time does not pass, it dissolves. And with it, the illusion of you as a traveler. What is left is not the person, but the space where the person once stood. Not absence, but presence emptied of grasping. There is no longer the ache of incompletion, because even incompletion has dissolved. You are no longer trying to hold the world together. You have allowed it to fall apart, and in its fragments you see the face of peace, not smiling, but watching. The world remains the same. The same noise, the same suffering, the same endless cycle of craving and collapse. But you are no longer within its machinery. You are still in motion, but not moved. Still breathing, but not reaching. There is no ambition left in your hands. Only the gentle act of touching what is here, without needing it to stay. And when you look at others now, it is with quiet love. Not the love of possession or passion, but of recognition. You see their suffering, how they reach, how they long, how they hurt, and you do not rush to fix them. You do not interrupt their dream. You simply sit beside it, as a shadow, as a mirror, as a silence that welcomes them home when they are ready. There is no triumph, no blaze of enlightenment, no final understanding that redeems the pain. Only the dissolution of need for any of it to be different. The candle burns, the wax melts, the flame flickers, and you, once terrified of its end, now find beauty in its dimming. The soul is not saved, it is surrendered. You let go, not with effort, but because there is nothing left to hold. The voice you once called, I, has grown quiet. The inner monologue has slowed to a whisper. Even thought, once a flood, now moves like autumn, leaves drifting, soft, without urgency. You do not seek silence, you have become it. And so the final illusion falls, that there was ever something to become. You do not arrive. You disappear, a pale hush at the threshold of thought, opening on a truth so quiet it silences all distractions. Existence is suffering. This is no cliché draped in drama, but the still axis of awareness, and before it lies every false hope, every constructed buffer against the ache of being. The soul recoils at the rawness first, then breathes into it. Life insists upon suffering, not as punishment, but as inevitability. The will wills, and in the willing is buried the seed of pain. We live in illusions, glass towers meant to climb, screens promising fulfillment, identities stitched from applause, but their promises dissolve at dusk. The self hopes, the self fears, the self endures. Yet, beneath the eye's tremor and the heart's trembling, there is only the will's endless yearning, dragging us through a desert of disappointment. The seeking is endless, and its end always further away. To cling to illusion is to invite suffering by design. Better to see the structure of delusion, the ego's chatter, the craving for status, the mirage of permanence, all phantoms dissolving under scrutiny. Every breath is a concession. The body ages, desire fades, relationships fracture. Modernity promises mastery, control, convenience, endless comfort, but in its sleek edifices lurks emptiness. The technological lullaby soothes us into numbness, yet the deeper hunger remains. We numb the pain, yet the pain persists. Recognition of this is not defeat, but clarity. The relief arrives not in fixing, but in seeing. Seeing the will's ceaseless drive for more, for better, for never enough, and inviting the stillness beyond it. Suffering is not a mistake to correct, nor a threat to escape. It is the crucible of consciousness. When desire contracts, when illusions fracture, there blooms a pallid clarity. The mind, stripped of its distractions, rests in the bare presence of pain, and there, in that nakedness, lies the clarity of truth. Weeping is not a breakdown, but an emergence, the ego dissolving bit by bit. And though the tears are cold, there is a purity to them, affirmation that the will has at last yielded. Desires vanish one by one. The need to be liked, to be safe, to be successful. With each departure comes a hollowing out, painful, yes, and yet a freedom. What once anchored us now drifts, and in the vacancy, the soul glimpses something older, deeper. The silent watcher, uninterested in outcomes. That still point does not cheer or guide, but simply is. It does not promise peace, it is peace, though unspoken. This unadorned lucidity is often mistaken for despair. It is neither hope nor its opposite. It is the stopping of all striving. Each painful truth lets go of one delusion, that life is fair, that suffering is avoidable, that happiness is attainable. These illusions collapse gently, like autumn leaves falling from a tree already bare. What remains is root, branch, trunk, but all illuminated in the pale light of awareness. No longer chasing the chimera of progress, no longer measuring worth by achievements. One stands in the quiet center, the will quieted, the mind clear. There comes a release point, not of relief, but of recognition that life's suffering is not a scourge, but the grain of reality. Letting go of hope doesn't extinguish life, it shifts its shape. Instead of grasping, we see. Instead of demanding, we observe. The self dissolves into that which is. There is sorrow, yes, but there is the stillness behind sorrow. Not transcendence in triumph, but transcendence in surrender. And so the voice ends, not in resolution, but in disappearance, like the candle's flame blown out, not with violence, but with the quiet breath of awareness. No promise beyond the moment, no plan beyond surrender. Only the luminous point where illusion ends and plain truth remains, where suffering is not enemy, but teacher, where the ego fades and consciousness is alone with being. Suffering reveals the architecture of existence, its sharp beams, its hollow chambers. Every joy borrowed from time returns as grief with interest. The child laughs, the adult mourns, the old man stares at the wall in silence. This is not tragedy, but inevitability. To exist is to be bound to decay. Pleasure is but the momentary cessation of pain, and even in its peak, it already whispers of its end. The moment one feels joy, the clock begins to count against it. No memory can preserve it, no hope can extend it. To will is to suffer. Not in metaphor, not in poetry, but in bare mechanics. The will craves what it does not have, recoils from what it fears, clutches what it cannot keep. It creates the world of longing, and then mourns its own failure. In this way, we are both architect and victim. We build prisons out of desires, and curse the walls for closing in. To see this clearly is not to despair, but to awaken, though awakening feels, at first, like a kind of death. The death of seeking, the end of pretending. Every identity is a mask worn by the will. The self is not solid, it is stitched together by needs, fears, and validations. The more one believes in it, the more one suffers. People speak of finding themselves, as though the self is a buried treasure. But there is no self beneath the masks, only the watcher, silent and still. To know this is to become unmoored. But this is the price of freedom, to float in the void rather than cling to the wreckage. The world is spectacle, noise, and distraction, a carnival of desire dressed in bright lights. It invites us to participate, to compete, to dream. But the dream always ends in waking, and the waking is always cold. We chase illusions, not because we are foolish, but because we fear the silence. Silence is the mirror in which we see what we are, temporary, restless, alone. To sit within it is to be undone, but also to be finally honest. Detachment is not the absence of feeling, but the cooling of the flame. The fire still burns, but it no longer consumes. One watches desire rise and fall, like waves no longer grasping, no longer resisting. This is not indifference, it is sobriety. The world remains what it is, filled with sorrow, fleeting joys, quiet betrayals, but the one who sees it clearly no longer fights the tide. He lets the waves wash through him, cleansed not of suffering, but of illusion. There is a solitude deeper than loneliness, a solitude not of absence, but of presence stripped bare. It arises when the last distraction fails, when the final hope dissolves. In that space, one sees not with the eyes, but with a stillness behind them. The world no longer demands interpretation, it simply is, and the soul, tired of struggle, sits beside it in silence. Here, there is no path, no purpose, no promise, only this moment, uncushioned and real. To live without illusion is not to deny beauty, but to cease clinging to it. Flowers bloom and die, just as we do. Music fades, love ends, health declines. But in each loss, a strange light appears, not from what is gone, but from what remains when nothing is left to hold. That is the light of awareness, uncolored by desire. It does not warm, but it illuminates. And in that cold illumination, there is peace, not the peace of contentment, but the peace of having ceased to wish. The will's quiet persistence pulses beneath every breath, unrelenting as the tide that claws at the shore. In its surge lies suffering woven into the fabric of waking hours. To be alive is to feel the ache of each moment slipping away, to taste the bitterness hidden in pleasure's fleeting sweetness. In the solitude of night, when echoes fade and thought retreats, the soul encounters the most honest companion, sorrow. It reveals itself not in dramatic collapse, but in the still widening of the heart, each silence cracking open the chrysalis of illusion that holds the brittle self. We trace our identities along the contour of expectations, what we should be, what we must achieve, how we ought to be loved. Yet each is a shadow, insubstantial and fleeting. We clutch them as though they are anchors, but they dissolve in the hand. Despair is not a plunging abyss, it is the realization that there is nowhere left to stand. The walls of our self-constructed temples give way, and the rubble falls around us, not with terror, but with inevitability. Then one remains, immersed in the debris, feeling the weight of what once was and no longer is. In this ruin, there lies possibility not of rebuilding, but of seeing. The will still throbs, but its grip loosens. Desire's voice still calls, but now it is a whisper against the wind. In the pause between one breath and the next, a dim clarity appears. That suffering is not separation from truth, but the path to it. Pain opens the door. Sorrow peels away the false layers, until only unadorned existence remains. There is no medicine more potent than recognition. Once the mind recognizes, grasping ends. The will has no fuel, and repose becomes possible. Yet this repose is not respite. It is a field where the storms pass. One does not feel less, it is feeling differently. The grief remains, but its sting softens. Weep again, and again the tears come. But now they fall on open ground. There is space between the loss and the self, a space where sorrow can settle without consuming. It is a savage grace to allow pain to be pain and nothing more. In that space, suffering speaks with the accent of truth, no rhetoric, no illusions. Each moment of detachment deepens the silence, not the terrible silence of emptiness, but the clarifying quiet of a mind untroubled by chatter. The world continues, its performance streets bustle, screens glow, voices shout. Yet, within, the soul listens to another cadence, the slow, steady pulse of being. No longer seeking meaning, but recognizing meaninglessness as the only meaning worth facing. In this recognition lies liberation from illusion. The self fades, but consciousness endures, stripped of decoration, naked in its witnessing. What remains is not doom, but lucidity. The future offers no comfort, the past no refuge. Both are myths spun by the will. Only the present persists, its edges sharp as glass. In its light we see impermanence, the body's decline, the faltering of thought, the erosion of memory. And yet each passing reveals beauty not in permanence, but in transience. A leaf trembles before it falls. A goodbye echoes with fading resonance. It is not the end that bears witness, but the fracture itself. In that fracture, consciousness shines, small and resolute. The illusion of control shatters quietly. Plans falter, certainties erode. The future refuses to be tamed. We see that life flows like water, not along courses we choose, but along channels carved by circumstance, chance, and the will's arrogant insistence. To accept that is not to surrender in fear, but to rest in the shapelessness of being. There is no narrative beyond the present scene, no character beyond the self who watches scenes unfold. The self evaporates, scene by scene, until only the continuum remains. Suffering is both prisoner and liberator. The will traps us in longing, yet longing's collapse emancipates consciousness from its own demands. When one no longer seeks, the world no longer demands. The heart does not close, but softens. One lives amidst sorrow without resisting it, without weaving it into identity. It exists and it passes, and the watcher remains, indifferent to its comings and goings, steady as stone in the current. We speak of love and loss as if they are separate realms, but love is suffering's twin. To love is to expose oneself to pain, to open the heart and invite wounding. Yet love also reveals the root of suffering, attachment. Attachment is the will's claim to permanence in impermanence. Let go the claim and love doesn't vanish, it shifts. It becomes the quiet presence that does not hold, that does not demand. A rose blooms and dies, but the scent lingers in memory, a scent not clung to, but inhaled and released. Modern illusions, oh how they glitter. Markets hum, data pulses, networks link. We imagine that connectivity will shield us, that consumption will still desire, that distraction will soften the ache. And yet, the more we consume, the emptier we become. The screens glow, but not with truth. They reflect ourselves, fragmented by craving. The algorithm promises ease, but offers only more wanting. To see through this, one must look with eyes unclouded, by desire eyes that do not want more, but want nothing. Only then does the carnival of illusions retreat, revealing the stark, unfiltered skyline of being. There is no refuge brighter than hopelessness. In hopelessness, hope dissolves, and with it the paralysis of ceaseless striving. One stands unshielded, vulnerable, naked in the wind, and paradoxically free. The will still breathes, but without tremor. It receives what comes, releases what goes. There is sorrow, yes, but no suffering beyond recognition. That is the alchemy. Suffering transmuted by awareness into stillness. In the silent crucible of awareness, ego dissolves. It slips away like ashes on the wind, leaving only dull ember consciousness. No beliefs, no identities, no illusions, remain nothing to hold, nothing to lose. What remains is the bare note of existence, resonating beyond time. In that resonance, there is neither triumph nor defeat, only the final exhalation of will. No epiphany crowns this surrender, no light at the end of the tunnel, only the ambient quiet in which illusions die and truth speaks. The flame of the self flickers, then falls, not with violence, but with the inevitability of gravity. And the soul, unbound from its own claims, drifts out of mourning into the neutrality of being. This ending has no ceremony, no applause, no final declaration, just a soft cinder of consciousness, glowing faintly in the void. It does not promise peace, nor enforce it. It simply abides. And in its abiding, the film of illusion tears away, revealing the world as it is unembellished, unhurried, unbroken. Let the viewer stay within this echo, this final hush. Let desire cease, let hope relinquish, let identity dissolve, not in tragedy, but in the sober clarity of truth. And within that truth, find no comfort, but also no despair, only presence, unfiltered, unending, unmoving, as the soul drifts into stillness and the final breath of will exhales into silence. There is a moment when the soul, exhausted by its own narratives, stops speaking, not out of resignation, but because words no longer suffice to cover the silence underneath. The tongue has sung every desire, cursed every disappointment, pleaded with every god who refused to answer, and now it falls still. In this stillness, awareness is no longer entangled with the person who suffers, but with the suffering itself, And that subtle shift dissolves the boundary between subject and pain. One no longer says, I suffer, but sees suffering as the atmosphere of existence itself, neutral, impersonal, vast. What the world calls failure is often merely lucidity breaking through the fog of ambition. The man who abandons his career, the woman who turns from love, the child who refuses to speak, they are not broken. They are awake. For what is success but suffering rewarded with distraction? And what is ambition but the will refusing to rest? The reward for striving is more striving, and the punishment for stillness is only the gaze of others, bewildered by a peace they cannot understand. But the one who sees clearly does not trade peace for performance. He withdraws, not to escape the world, but to see it more clearly through the pale window of detachment. We speak often of meaning as though it is a hidden treasure buried deep beneath our lives. But what if meaning is not something to be found, but something to be relinquished? What if the hunger for meaning is itself a form of suffering, the will dressed in spiritual language? Meaning promises coherence, but coherence is a lie. Life is not a story. It is a series of sensations and impressions scattered like ash in the wind. To live without meaning is not to descend into despair, but to stand with open eyes at the edge of chaos and see it not as enemy, but as mirror. There is no consolation in truth, only clarity. And clarity is cold, like moonlight on an empty street. It does not caress or comfort. It reveals, and in that revelation, the self must reckon with its own smallness. All that we build, all that we protect, all that we chase, it is scaffolding around a silence we do not wish to hear. But once the scaffolding falls, what remains is not a void, but a space unoccupied by desire. And in that space, life continues not with fervor, but with stillness. Relationships falter, not because love ends, but because illusion dies. We do not love others, we love what they promise. We love their reflection of our hopes, their reinforcement of our story. When they stop performing that function, we say love has failed. But love does not fail. It simply strips away its disguise and reveals itself as a momentary fusion of two willful beings, each aching, each incomplete, each mistaking the other for a cure. When we see this, we do not stop loving. We stop expecting. And in that space, something quieter arises. Not love as salvation, but love as recognition of shared suffering. Even beauty deceives. The mountain, the face, the chord all provoke longing, not for themselves, but for what they awaken in us. A glimpse of the eternal, a reminder of wholeness never known. But to chase beauty is to suffer its transience. The flower dies, the song fades, the beloved ages. To see beauty clearly is to let it die without clinging. It is to observe its dissolution without begging for return. True appreciation is not in holding, but in releasing again and again until even the desire to witness beauty dissolves into stillness. Modernity multiplies the illusions. We are told we are free, yet every choice is pre-written by our conditioning. We are told we are important, yet our lives vanish without consequence. We are told we are progressing, yet the inner emptiness deepens. The more the world insists on its narrative of optimism, the more it betrays its fear of silence. But one who is not afraid of silence no longer plays the game. He walks through the marketplace untouched. Not because he is above it, but because he no longer needs what it offers. The world cannot seduce the one who has seen through desire. This is not enlightenment nor awakening. These words are stained with promise. This is something smaller, quieter, and emptying out. One peels away the layers of hope, like dead skin, until the core is bare. And in that bareness, life continues undramatic, untransformed. The rain still falls, the body still aches. The hours still pass without mercy. But now they are no longer resisted. They are no longer interpreted, they simply are. Time becomes no longer a road to salvation, but a quiet erosion. Each second wears away the self, as water smooths stone. And when the self is finally thin enough to be transparent, the world comes into view, not as object, but as presence. Everything changes, and nothing is grasped. One lives not by moving forward, but by ceasing to move. The past no longer binds. The future no longer beckons. The now is sufficient. Precisely because it offers nothing, death, that silent witness, is no longer a threat. It becomes the final detachment, the last release. To fear, it is to fear non-being, but we fear it only because we believe we are something. When the self dissolves, death loses its sting. It is not an end, but a vanishing. Not a closing of the book, but the fading of ink on the page. What suffers ends, and what remains cannot suffer. In that, there is peace, not the peace of reward, but the peace of absence. And so, the voice continues, though quieter now. It speaks not to instruct, but to reflect. Each word a ripple in the still water of awareness. There is no call to act, no plea to change, only the observation of what is. Life, in all its futility, continues. The sun rises without reason. The heart beats without meaning. The breath flows without destination. And all of it is enough, not because it fulfills, but because it no longer needs to. The final liberation is not joy, but neutrality. Not transcendence, but intimacy with the real. One does not ascend, one dissolves. The will goes silent, the illusions fall, and what remains is presence cold, vast, and strangely tender, like a landscape untouched by human hands. In that silence, everything is complete, and there is nothing left to say. The hour grows dim. Thought slows its spinning, not by effort, but from exhaustion. The heart, long burdened by its own longing, ceases to plead. In the hush that follows, there is only the presence of being empty, infinite, indifferent. One does not walk out of suffering as though crossing a threshold. One is eroded by it, grain by grain, until only the witness remains, too faint to name, too wide to contain. What was once called I has grown still, and in that stillness the world continues without reference. The soul, now silent, no longer dreams of redemption. The great false promise that life owes us joy, that time shall mend, that love will save, is seen through and thus released. There is no bitterness, for bitterness belongs to the will, and the will has no more commands. Even sorrow, once howled into the dark like a child seeking arms, has become a gentle companion, asking nothing, offering nothing, merely sitting beside what is. The seasons pass in indifference. Spring blooms without sentiment, winter falls without malice. The stars remain uninvested in our dramas. The universe speaks in neither blessing nor curse, only in persistence. And we, small vibrations of that vast rhythm, flicker briefly and vanish. The tragedy is not that we vanish, but that we ever imagined we would not. Freedom does not come from the triumph of the self, but from its quiet undoing. No revelation, no insight, no awakening. Only the gradual slipping of the knot. The hands that once clutched so tightly now fall open, not from wisdom, but from weariness. The eyes that scan the horizon for promise now turn inward and find only the great unmoving depth from which all things rise and return. This is not enlightenment, it is the end of enchantment. And love, love, no longer fevered, no longer desperate, not a flame-seeking fuel, but a faint glow in the ashes. It does not speak or bind, it simply is. A recognition, perhaps, that all things suffer, and in that suffering, all things are bound. There is no more to demand of love. It has fulfilled its task, which was not to save us, but to expose us. To live now is not to strive, but to yield, not to grasp, but to float, not to hope, but to observe. Each breath a letting go, each step an invitation to disappear a little further. One does not fear the end, for the end is already here, has always been here, unfolding in slow motion. Death is not an event, but a process, the gradual erosion of the illusion of self. Silence becomes the only true prayer, not offered to a god, but to no one, a gesture of acknowledgement that there is nothing to hold, nothing to reach, nothing to become. What remains is not absence, but presence without object. A stillness so vast that even sorrow cannot echo within it, a stillness that contains all motion, all becoming, all dying. In this final space, even thought retreats, not into sleep, but into something deeper, a state without want, without wound. There are no answers here, because there are no questions, only this, the soft rhythm of what is. undisturbed by desire. And here, at last, the will, always burning, always hungering, extinguishes itself, like a candle content, to vanish into its own smoke. No future, no past, no path, only now, only this. Only the hush that comes when all voices are done speaking. The hush that is not silence, but the sound of being itself. Cold, vast, impersonal, and yet strangely kind. And so the soul, untethered, dissolves, not into light, but into quiet, not into peace, but into non-becoming, not into salvation, but into the eternal neutrality of existence. What remains is not presence, but the absence of all needing to be, and that is enough. When the noise fades, and all that remains is the hollow murmur beneath your breath, you begin to sense it, the great silence of being. Not the peace sold in doctrines or rituals, but the raw, unadorned absence of distraction. Here, in this inward dusk, there is no applause, no reward, no culmination. Only the quiet realization that life does not seek your happiness. It moves indifferent, like the sea eroding its own shore. You were told to strive, to accumulate, to ascend, as though existence were a ladder. But the higher you climb, the thinner the air becomes, and the more you must pretend you are not suffocating. Every gain demands a mask. Every triumph conceals its shadow. What you call success is often just the eloquent postponement of despair. Suffering is not the anomaly, it is the ground tone. Joy, when it appears, is but a shimmer on the surface of an ocean too deep to ever grasp. Beneath it, the current is sorrow, not dramatic, not tragic, but slow and total, like the setting of a sun that never rose. The child weeps not only from pain, but from the overwhelming fact of existence itself, the sudden, unbearable weight of being. Desire is the architect of unrest. To want is to rupture the stillness of the present. Every longing carries within it a prophecy of dissatisfaction. You reach, and the moment you grasp, the object withers. The will feeds on illusion, and yet, without illusion, it cannot move. Thus, we are pulled forward by mirages and punished by their collapse. Modern life, gilded with convenience and screens, offers the illusion of control. We scroll past despair, filter our faces, and drown meaning in algorithms. Yet the gnawing hollowness persists. It wakes with you. It waits at the edge of each purchase, each performance, each promise. It knows what you are trying to forget, that comfort is not salvation and distraction is not deliverance. Love, too, is often mistaken. What we call love is usually possession, a hunger disguised as devotion. We do not see the other, we only see our reflection in their gaze. And when they no longer mirror our imagined self, we withdraw, call it betrayal, call it incompatibility. But it is simply the truth emerging from behind the veil of projection. Loneliness is not cured by presence. It is not the absence of others that wounds us, but the absence of being truly seen. And even when seen, we feel exposed, vulnerable to the gaze, the judgment, the misunderstanding. So we build walls and call them personalities. We curate a self layer upon layer until we forget what lies beneath. There is a grief that has no name, the grief of existing without clear reason. Not the grief of loss, but the grief of presence. The absurd fact that you are here, that you must endure time, choice, decay. Every day demands that you act as though you understand, but you do not. No one does. They just learn to perform certainty better. To strip away illusion is not to become free in the way we imagine. It is to become bare, naked before the indifferent sky. It is not ecstasy, it is clarity. And clarity, while pure, is not kind. It does not soothe, it exposes. The myth you inherited about progress, destiny, and meaning begin to disintegrate. In their place, silence. But in that silence, something still breathes. Not hope, not ambition, but awareness. A presence that does not reach, does not resist. It sees suffering not as a detour, but as the path itself. Every wound becomes a window. Every ache a doorway. You no longer ask for the pain to end, but for the veil to lift. The soul in crisis is not broken. it is awakening. It is shedding the skin of its borrowed dreams. You begin to realize that you do not need more, you need less. Less noise, less striving, less pretending. In the stillness of subtraction, you find something the world cannot give, the peace of no longer needing anything from it. And when you need less, you become more. Not more impressive, not more admired, but more real. You become the thing that remains when the performances end, the quiet flame beneath the ashes, the echo of what cannot be named. The world does not torment us with cruelty, but with indifference. It is not that it means us harm, it simply does not see us. Like a storm, unaware of the trees, it uproots. Reality moves without regard for human longing. We suffer not because the world is against us, but because we have mistaken it for something that should care. Even our noblest emotions are shadows cast by the will. Compassion, loyalty, sacrifice all emerge from the same restless hunger to affirm our existence. We help not out of pure love, but to silence our own discomfort with another's pain. Every virtue conceals a deeper thirst, and when the need is quenched, the virtue often fades. Pleasure does not endure, it flickers, then vanishes, always needing more of itself to be sustained. But suffering, by contrast, is constant. It carves its patterns into the bones, finds a home beneath the skin. Pleasure whispers and disappears. Suffering speaks with the weight of permanence. You are taught to chase happiness as if it were a possession, a thing to be acquired. But happiness, when it comes, is not earned. It is accidental, momentary, and always fleeting. The more you clutch at it, the more it evades. Like a shadow that recedes as you approach, it punishes pursuit with emptiness. Detachment is not escape. It is not the refusal to feel, but the refusal to cling. It is the silent understanding that all things must pass, not because of fate, but because of the very nature of existence. To hold on is to invite suffering. To let go is not to reject, but to allow things to be what they are, impermanent. The illusion of self, that tightly wound bundle of memories, fears, and projections, is perhaps the most painful illusion of all. We live as if we are fixed, central, enduring, but the self is not a thing. It is a process, a flicker of will dressing itself in continuity. Who you were yesterday is already gone. Who you are now is already fading. Time is not a river carrying us forward. It is a weight that drags behind, filled with all we cannot change, all we did not say, all we hoped would be different. The future is an illusion, the past a ghost. What remains is only this, the breath, the ache, the awareness of passing. Society rewards distraction. It elevates the loud, the beautiful, the successful, but these are only masks worn by deeper despair. The laughing face may conceal a silent scream. The triumphant gaze may veil a hollowness too deep to name. What you see is not what is, it is what is performed. To be awake is to suffer consciously. It is to see without flinching the futility of effort, the collapse of meaning, the inescapable brevity of life. But in that suffering, a strange peace emerges, not because the pain ends, but because the need for it to end dissolves. You cease to fight the tide, you float. Pain is the great equalizer. It strips us of pretense, exposes the fragility beneath pride. No one escapes it. No belief system, no wealth, no accomplishment can shield the soul from the slow erosion of time and the inevitable descent into decay. All are equal before the night. What remains when all is taken is not despair, it is truth. Cold, unwavering, unadorned. It does not soothe, but it clarifies. It does not uplift, but it reveals. And in that revelation, you see that you were never in control, never separate, never permanent. You are the passing, not the passer. The voice of the world grows dim, and in its place, a deeper stillness begins to speak, not in language, but in presence, not in answers, but in absence. This is the truth that cannot be taught, only endured. The world offers no reconciliation, only the slow drip of awareness that all hope is conditional and all certainty is borrowed. We arrive each morning to the same hollow dawn, yet we cling to its light as though it possessed warmth beyond the inevitable edge of night. The heart learns what the mind denies, that longing is an endless vacancy, and fulfillment only intensifies the hunger by reminding us of its impermanence. We observe illusions, clothed in the garments of progress, technology, relationships, status, each promising inner silence, but delivering only another distraction. We exchange one void for another, believing this next shell will fill us, forgetting that shells offer only hollowness. You scroll through images of happiness, collected fragments of lives not your own, and the ache within shifts, not toward solace, but toward deeper estrangement. We seek connection in screens, companionship in mirrors, meaning in applause, only to find ourselves more isolated than before. The notion of self-improvement is itself part of the will, a whisper that you are not yet enough. You strive against yourself, forging your identity in conflict. Yet the real victory lies not in conquering, but in dissolving. Not in molding better versions, but in recognizing that you are already built from the unsteady threads of desire, fear, and passing thought. When that recognition dawns, the need to become someone else fades. Suffering is the language of the will turned inward. It is the voice the body cannot silence, the ache behind ambition, the price of every desire fulfilled. It cannot be negotiated with, only observed. When you stop arguing with it, you hear its message, that all striving is futile, and that restlessness itself is the wound. To hold suffering is not to endure pain, but to cease resistance, not to change what trembles, but to see its trembling. The illusions we cling to are built from fear of death, abandonment, insignificance. We build narratives to comfort ourselves, that love saves, that faith redeems, that time heals. But beneath every narrative lies the raw fact of impermanence. Even the stars burn out, even memory decays. What you call eternal is only passing more slowly. There is no final refuge, only the passing itself. Attachment is the quiet betrayal. You cling to experiences, to people, to identities, hoping they will anchor you. Yet attachment turns living into debt. Every moment once lost becomes a chain. Every relationship once changed becomes a wound. Letting go is not the abandonment of love, but the recognition that love devoid of need is the only love not destined to break. Truth does not reveal itself in the light, but in shadows. It is not found in growth, but in peeling back growth until nothing remains but the still point behind the turning. You recognize the shadow of your desires, the mirage behind every promise, the echo behind every affirmation, and the recognition feels like both grief and liberation. Grief for illusions fallen, liberation in the collapsing of all defenses. There is a fierce mourning in wakefulness, the mourning of the self that never was, the self you hoped to be, the self you insisted on becoming. Such mourning is not weakness, it is honesty. It is the acknowledgement that the world is not a workshop for your becoming, but a mirror of your undoing. This mourning is not closure, it is opening, a quiet cracking of the husk around what is essential. The mind fears the silence, so it fills it with thought, noise, dreams, plans. But thought is the servant of the will, it never pauses. In the silence behind thought, you glimpse the absence of wanting. In the silence behind wanting, you glimpse what is not risk but rest. And that rest is not asleep, it is presence. Suffering ends not with resolution, but with cessation of resistance. The resistance is the will demanding another way. It is the resentment of what is. When you stop resisting, even suffering becomes part of the terrain, not something to fix, but something to witness. You are no longer outside your pain, you are its seeing. You become the consciousness in which it moves, not the prisoner of its movements. Modern promises weave illusions of control, self-optimization, endless improvement, curated identity. They fool you into believing you can overcome suffering by outpacing it. But suffering is not outrun, it is seen. It is lived through presence, not abolition, but recognition, not victory, but clarity. In recognizing suffering as the constant background tone, even joys lose their tyranny. They no longer demand attention, because their disappearance would not alter the core awareness. We cling to mythologies, love immortal, life meaningful beyond death, growth perpetual. These are as ephemeral as our breath. The mythologies fail, yet we cling, rewriting them endlessly in new forms. Self, help, spirituality, social validation. But all mythologies are comforting lies, useful until you awaken. Awakening is the tearing away of all comforting lies. Awakening is the collapse, the emptiness, the raw, seeing that is both agony and grace. Detachment is not the denial of love, but its most authentic expression. Love not as possession, but as recognition without demand. Attachment is tether, detachment is liberty. You no longer seek to save, to be saved, to mold, to become. You no longer fuel the will with its illusions. Instead, you rest in the awareness that love and suffering are not things to be fixed, but experiences to be witnessed. In that witnessing, you become the stillness at life's mercy, not resisting, not demanding, not yearning, not peace in the sense of cessation, but peace as presence. Peace defined not by absence of disturbance, but by absence of demand upon it. And in that peace, you find neither triumph, nor solace, nor joy. It is the absence of all seeking. The cessation of need itself. Slowly, imperceptibly, the script of desire unravels. The demands upon the world loosen. The craving to perform, to impress, to win fades. You discover the relief of needing nothing, not because you have everything, but because you have stopped the hunger. And in that relief, something like clarity glimmers, not luminous, not radiant, but steady, not again, but once and enough. Let this realization be neither fete nor festival, but the quieting of discord. Let it dissolve wishes without regret, expectations without bitterness, illusions without blame. Let the voice fall silent on your lips. Let the script become still. Let the soul turn inward, not with ambition,